The Whispering Woods, a tale of the Bennett family. Welcome to Tales from the Dark Side, where we explore the strangest mysteries that happen to real people. Tonight, we tell you about the Bennett family and their impossible shared dreams. This is a story about a family who all had the same nightmare, night after night, until something terrible happened. Get ready for a journey into the unknown, where dreams become real and the line between sleeping and waking disappears. The move to Milfield. It was 1977. The small town of Milfield sat quietly between mountains and thick forests in northern Vermont. People knew each other here. Life moved slowly, far away from the noise and trouble of big cities. The fall leaves were just starting to change colors, turning the hills bright orange and deep red. It was a beautiful place that would soon become the setting for one of the strangest stories ever told. The Bennett family moved into the old house at 47 Oakwood Lane in early September. The house was built in 1887 and had been empty for almost 7 years. The last owner was an old woman named Margaret Holloway who died in her sleep. People in town whispered that Margaret had been acting strange before she died. She talked about weird visions and visitors that no one else could see. But everyone thought she was just a lonely old woman losing her mind. On moving day, the Bennett station wagon and a big moving truck drove up the long gravel driveway. The sound of tires on loose stones broke the long silence around the property. The house stood before them like something from a scary movie. It was 3 stories tall with peeling paint, a wraparound porch, and fancy wooden decorations that were falling apart. Tall windows looked like watching eyes, reflecting the afternoon sun as if the house was waking up after a long sleep. "It has personality," Eleanor said, squeezing her husband's hand as they stood on the lawn looking at their new home. Robert nodded, though something in his face showed he wasn't completely sure about this place. There was a quick shadow of doubt that he pushed away. The children reacted the way you'd expect. Michael, 17 years old, tried to act like he didn't care, but you could tell he was interested in the house's history. Sarah, quiet and thoughtful, was already thinking about taking pictures of the place. And young Timothy ran from room to room, his excited voice echoing through the empty spaces that had been silent for years. "Can I have the tower room?" Timothy asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "The turret," Robert corrected gently. "And I think that might be better as your mother's art studio. The light would be perfect for her painting." Eleanor smiled, already imagining her canvases set up under the curved windows with natural light streaming in from all sides. "Maybe you can visit me there when I'm working, Tim. It can be our special place." The Bennetts seemed like the perfect American family. Robert Bennett was 42, a respected doctor who studied sleep problems and shared dreams. His thick glasses and neat beard made him look smart and serious, while his warm smile made people feel comfortable around him. In Boston, he had run a successful private practice while teaching part-time at a famous medical school. His work had made him well known, especially his research on how bad experiences could cause the same nightmares to happen in whole families. His wife, Eleanor, was 39 and a talented artist known for her haunting oil paintings of dreamlike landscapes. She had long auburn hair usually braided loosely and liked to wear flowing, artistic clothes that stood out in small-town Vermont. Her work had been shown in several Boston art galleries and was praised for its emotional depth and skill. Critics often said her paintings seemed to capture moments between being awake and asleep, blurring the line between what's real and what's dreamed. They had 3 children. Michael, 17, was a bright student who wanted to become a writer. Sarah, 15, was a quiet girl who loved photography. And Timothy, 8, was the youngest, with an imagination that seemed endless. Michael had his father's analytical mind and his mother's artistic sense. He wrote short stories that were surprisingly mature for his age, exploring themes of identity and how we see the world. Sarah was shy and liked to observe life through her camera, capturing moments others might miss. Timothy, with his boundless energy and strange intuition, often seemed to live in his own world, full of imaginary friends and elaborate fantasies. Robert had taken a job at Milfield State University's psychology department. It was an important position that let him continue his research while giving his family a more peaceful place to live. The move from Boston had been caused by a series of disturbing events, strange encounters, and unexplained things that Robert blamed on the stress of city life. Milfield, with its calm atmosphere and close community, promised a fresh start. The unsettling events that had pushed the Bennetts to leave Boston were rarely talked about outside the family. It started with Eleanor's paintings taking a dark turn. Her usually balanced compositions became chaotic, filled with dark colors and shadowy figures lurking at the edges of the canvas. When asked about this change, Eleanor said she was just trying new techniques. But Robert noticed her growing unease, the way she would stare at her own work as if seeing something there that troubled her deeply. Then came Michael's night terrors, episodes where the teenager would wake up screaming about shadows gathering at the foot of his bed. Sarah developed an unexplainable fear of mirrors, covering the one in her bedroom with a scarf and avoiding her reflection whenever possible. And Timothy began talking about a whispering man who visited him at night, standing in the corner of his room, telling him secrets he couldn't remember in the morning. Robert had looked for medical explanations. He arranged sleep studies for Michael, therapy for Sarah, and gentle questioning of Timothy about his imaginary friend. But all the tests showed nothing wrong, leaving Robert to think that maybe the cramped apartment, the city noise, the pollution, and the general stress of city living were affecting his family's mental health. When the opportunity at Milfield State University came up, it seemed like the perfect solution. A chance to start fresh in a place where the air was clean, the nights were quiet, and nature's beauty might heal whatever unnamed worry had taken root in his family. Sometimes a change of environment is the best medicine, he had told Eleanor as they discussed moving. The children could use more space, more nature, and think of what the Vermont landscapes could do for your painting. Eleanor had agreed, though she had some concerns. Do you really think it's just the city, Robert? Sometimes I wonder if we're bringing something with us, something inside us. All the more reason to go, Robert had replied. If there is something psychological affecting us, a new setting might help break the pattern. The morning they left Boston, Timothy asked a question that would later seem to predict the future. Will the whispering man know where to find us in Vermont? Robert had assured him that imaginary friends stayed behind when you moved, like old toys left in the attic. How wrong he would turn out to be. Life in the new house. The Bennetts quickly settled into their new life. Robert threw himself into his work at the university. Eleanor set up an art studio in the spacious attic of their Victorian home. The children enrolled in local schools. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. The neighbors were friendly. The autumn air was crisp and refreshing. Despite its age, the old house provided a comfortable home. The people of Milfield had first viewed the newcomers with the polite curiosity typical of small towns. The Bennetts were something new, a sophisticated family from the city with academic credentials and artistic pursuits. Robert, with his tweed jackets and thoughtful manner, fit the role of university professor perfectly. Eleanor's bohemian style raised a few eyebrows at the local grocery store, but her warm smile and genuine interest in the town's history quickly won over even the most conservative residents. The first dinner party the Bennetts hosted was a small gathering of Robert's university colleagues and their spouses. It was considered a success. Eleanor's cooking impressed the guests, and Robert's collection of jazz records provided a sophisticated soundtrack to the evening's conversations about psychology, art, and literature. If anyone noticed the slight tension in Eleanor's smile when the discussion turned to dreams, or the way Robert's hand tightened around his wine glass when a colleague mentioned the history of their house, they attributed it to the natural anxiety of new homeowners eager to make a good impression. Michael found a place on the high school's literary magazine, earning praise from his English teacher for his short stories. Sarah joined the photography club, though she kept to herself, preferring to wander the school grounds during lunch, taking pictures of shadows cast by the old oak trees that surrounded the campus. Timothy, with his outgoing nature and infectious laugh, had no trouble making friends at the elementary school, quickly becoming a favorite among both his classmates and teachers. The house at 47 Oakwood Lane, which had stood empty for so long, seemed to come alive with the sounds of the family. Robert's typewriter clicking late into the night as he worked on research papers. Eleanor's paintbrushes swishing against canvas in the attic studio. Michael's rock music playing behind his closed bedroom door. Sarah's darkroom chemicals bubbling in the converted pantry, and Timothy's toy cars racing across hardwood floors. The creaks and groans of the old structure became familiar, part of the house's charm rather than cause for concern. Each morning, Eleanor would make coffee in the percolator that sat on the old stove, its gentle bubbling accompanied by the sound of the radio tuned to the local station. Robert would join her, adjusting his tie as he reviewed his lecture notes for the day. The children would come downstairs in stages. Timothy first, eager for breakfast and the day ahead. Sarah next, quiet and still half asleep. And finally Michael, always running late, grabbing toast as he rushed out the door. It was a rhythm, a pattern of family life that seemed to promise stability and peace. The Bennetts began to believe that the strange experiences in Boston had indeed been left behind, that whatever shadow had fallen across their family had been dispelled by Vermont's clear mountain air and the solid walls of their new home. The first nightmare. It was on October 7th that the first incident occurred. That night, all 5 members of the Bennett family had the same nightmare. They each reported standing in a vast, dark forest clearing under a blood-red moon. In the center of the clearing stood a tall, twisted tree with bare branches that reached like skeleton fingers toward the crimson sky. And from those branches hung 5 empty nooses, swaying gently in a wind that carried whispers, unintelligible yet somehow familiar. The dream had a quality that made it different from ordinary nightmares, a vivid realness that stayed with them even after waking. They could feel the texture of rough bark under their fingertips, smell the earthy scent of fallen leaves mixed with something metallic, feel the chill air against their skin, and hear the distant sound of something moving in the underbrush. The details were so vivid they seemed more like memories than products of sleeping minds. For Robert, the dream had been particularly disturbing. He hadn't just observed the scene, he had felt drawn to the tree, his feet moving on their own across the soft forest floor. He had reached out, almost touching one of the nooses, feeling its rough rope against his palm before jerking awake, his heart pounding against his ribs like a caged animal trying to escape. Eleanor had experienced the dream from a different perspective, watching from the edge of the clearing as shadowy figures moved toward the tree. She couldn't see their faces, but something about their silhouettes seemed familiar, triggering a motherly instinct to run forward, to stop whatever was about to happen. But in the dream, she had been paralyzed, unable to move or call out, forced to watch as the figures approached the waiting nooses. Michael's version had included a detail the others hadn't mentioned, a sound like distant singing, a melody he couldn't quite grasp but that seemed to be coming from the tree itself, as if the gnarled oak was humming through its twisted bark. The song had filled him with a deep sadness, a sense that something terrible was going to happen and couldn't be stopped, leaving him waking with tears streaming down his face. Sarah had noticed the patterns in the clearing, how the fallen leaves formed circles around the tree, how the moonlight created geometric shadows that seemed intentional rather than random, as if the entire scene had been carefully arranged for some purpose she couldn't understand. Her photographer's eye had captured details the others had missed. The way the bark of the tree spiraled in an unnatural pattern and the strange symbols that seemed carved into its trunk. And Timothy, with a child's directness, had described the nooses as waiting for us, a simple observation that would later seem the most frightening of all. The family gathered at the breakfast table the following morning, each looking unusually quiet. It was Timothy who first mentioned his dream, describing the forest and the tree with childlike simplicity. The color drained from Eleanor's face as Michael and Sarah exchanged glances of disbelief. Robert, always the analytical one, dismissed the coincidence as a result of shared worries about their recent move. But when the same nightmare returned the following night, and the night after that, Robert began writing down their experiences in a journal. Each family member's account remained the same. The same forest, the same tree, the same 5 nooses. The only difference was where they stood in the dream. Sometimes they would watch from the edge of the clearing. Other times they would find themselves walking toward the tree, pulled by an invisible force they couldn't resist. Robert's research, Robert's journal entries, later found in his office at the university, show his growing concern and his attempts to stay scientific in the face of something increasingly unexplainable. October 9, 1977, third night in a row of shared dream content among all family members. Basic imagery stays the same. Forest clearing, twisted tree, 5 nooses, red moon. Where we stand in the dream changes. Timothy reports standing directly under the tree, looking up at the nooses. Eleanor watches from the forest edge. Michael, Sarah, and I approach from different directions. The chances of 5 people having such similar dream content without outside influence is basically impossible. Possible explanations: 1. Unconscious influence through talking about it. 2. Environmental factor affecting sleep patterns. 3. Shared psychological response to the move and new environment. We'll start checking the house for mold, gas leaks, or other potential toxins tomorrow. October 11th, 1977, 5th night. Dreams continue. House inspection found no environmental toxins or safety problems. Dream content getting worse in concerning ways. The whispers are becoming clearer, though still can't understand them. Eleanor reports hearing what sounds like her name being called. Michael describes a pulling sensation toward the central tree. Sarah's account includes shadows moving among the trees around the clearing. Timothy drew a picture today, the tree with 5 stick figures walking toward it. When asked about the figures, he said they were our family. His matter-of-fact acceptance of this image is perhaps the most disturbing part. October 13th, 1977, 1 week of continuous shared dreaming. Hard to stay objective as a professional. The dream now includes sensory components beyond just visual temperature changes, smell of damp earth and decay, texture of tree bark. Eleanor woke with a rope burn-like mark on her palm after dreaming of touching one of the nooses. The mark faded within hours. Rational explanations becoming increasingly inadequate. Considering talking with Dr. Winters from the parapsychology department, though doing so risks my professional reputation. Family showing signs of sleep deprivation, irritability, concentration problems, mild paranoia. Michael missed school today, claiming illness, though I suspect he simply needed rest. Found Sarah sleepwalking last night, standing at her bedroom window facing the forest behind our property. When I guided her back to bed, she whispered, "The tree is calling." Gave everyone mild sleeping pills tonight. Will monitor effects. Robert's initial doubt gave way to growing worry as the shared dreams continued. His scientific training demanded logical explanations, yet the consistency and development of the dream experiences defied normal understanding. He checked the house for environmental toxins, carbon monoxide, or mold that might cause hallucinations. Finding nothing, he considered mass suggestion, the power of shared stories to influence dream content. But the details reported by each family member were too specific, too consistent for such an explanation to work. As a sleep specialist, Robert knew that shared dream content among family members wasn't entirely unknown. Cases existed in psychological literature of spouses or twins reporting similar dreams. But for all 5 members of a family to experience virtually identical nightmares night after night, with evolving story elements, that fell well outside established science. The toll on the family. By the end of October, the shared nightmares had begun to take their toll. Dark circles shadowed the family's eyes, and their once bright personalities had become dull. Eleanor's paintings grew increasingly disturbing, canvases filled with twisted trees and crimson skies. The change in her artwork provided a visual record of the family's descent into the shared nightmare. Her earlier works from their first weeks in Milfield had captured the beauty of Vermont autumn, golden light filtering through fiery leaves, the Victorian house rendered in warm, welcoming tones. But as the dreams continued, her paintings changed. The colors darkened, compositions became chaotic, and the twisted tree from their nightmares began to appear in every piece. Sometimes it was the central focus, sometimes lurking at the edges, but always present, always watching. One painting in particular, later titled The Waiting, showed the tree in stark silhouette against a blood-red sky, 5 nooses hanging from its branches. But what made the piece truly disturbing were the shadows cast by the nooses, not the shapes of empty ropes, but human silhouettes, suggesting bodies where none were shown. When Robert asked about this detail, Eleanor seemed surprised, claiming she hadn't meant to create that effect. "The brush sometimes knows things we don't," she had whispered. staring at her own work with a mixture of fear and fascination. Michael's writing took a dark turn, filled with themes of fate and inevitability. His short stories, once varied in subject and style, now revolved around variations of the same story. Characters drawn to places they didn't want to go, making choices they didn't want to make, all while knowing they couldn't resist. His English teacher, concerned by this thematic fixation and the increasingly hopeless tone of his work, contacted Robert to express concern. "It's just a phase," Robert had assured her. "Teenagers often explore dark themes in their creative work. It's a safe way to process complex emotions." But privately, he wondered if Michael's stories were more than typical teenage angst. If they were instead his son's attempt to make sense of the unexplainable experience they were all sharing. In one story titled The Calling, Michael had written, "The tree doesn't need to chase you. It's patient. It knows that once it's chosen you, you'll come to it eventually. Free will is the greatest illusion. We think we're making choices, but we're just following a script written long before we were born. Walking paths cleared for us by those who came before, heading toward destinations that have been waiting for us all along." Sarah stopped taking photographs altogether, claiming that shadows appeared in her developed pictures that hadn't been there when she took them. Her darkroom in the converted pantry, once her sanctuary, now remained locked, her camera gathering dust on her dresser. When Robert finally convinced her to show him the troubling photographs, he had to admit there was something strange about them. Areas of darkness that seemed to have form and intention, not the random light leaks or processing errors he had expected. In one image of the forest behind their property, a shape among the trees resembled the twisted oak from their dreams, though no such tree was visible when visiting the actual location. In another, a family portrait taken in their living room, 5 shadow-like shapes hung from the ceiling behind them, noose-like forms that could be dismissed as camera strap reflections or processing problems if not for their consistent appearance across multiple photographs. And young Timothy, once so full of energy, became withdrawn, spending hours drawing the same twisted tree over and over in his sketchbook. His kindergarten teacher sent home a note expressing concern about his repeated drawings of people hanging from a tree, suggesting that perhaps he had been exposed to inappropriate media content. The childish drawings with their stick-figure simplicity were somehow more disturbing than Eleanor's sophisticated paintings or Sarah's shadowed photographs. The horror of their shared nightmare filtered through innocent eyes and rendered in crayon and marker. Scientific investigation. Robert, determined to find a scientific explanation, installed recording equipment in their bedrooms to monitor their sleep patterns. The technology available in 1977 was basic by today's standards: bulky tape recorders, simple brainwave machines borrowed from the university's sleep lab, Super 8 film cameras set to capture time-lapse footage, but it was the best Robert could arrange on short notice. He spent hours reviewing the data, looking for patterns, connections, anything that might explain what was happening to his family. What he found defied conventional sleep science. The results were unprecedented. All 5 family members entered REM sleep at the same time and stayed synchronized throughout the night, a phenomenon that went against all established sleep science. Normally, individuals cycle through sleep stages independently, with REM periods occurring at different times. For an entire family to enter and exit REM sleep in perfect sync was, by all accounts, impossible. The Super 8 footage showed something equally disturbing. Moments when all 5 sleepers would sit upright in bed at the same time, their eyes still closed, their lips moving in perfect unison as if reciting the same unheard words. These episodes lasted exactly 7 minutes each time before the sleepers would lie down again, continuing their synchronized sleep cycles as if nothing had happened. More disturbing were the whispers captured on the audio recordings, unintelligible murmurs that didn't come from any of the sleepers. Robert had the university's audio technician analyze the recordings, hoping to find a rational explanation: radio interference, tape problems, house noises. The technician found none of these. The whispers were real, present in the rooms, captured clearly on tape, yet seeming to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. When amplified and slowed down, the whispers remained largely unintelligible, but certain phrases began to emerge. "Come to us. The tree waits. 5 for 5. Complete the circle." Phrases that matched the content of the shared dreams, yet were somehow being spoken aloud in the bedrooms of the sleeping family. In his journal, Robert wrote, "The audio phenomena defy explanation. Source analysis inconclusive, not coming from any of the sleepers, yet present in all 5 rooms. Identical content across all recordings. Technical specialist confirms no cross-contamination between tapes. Not radio interference or equipment malfunction. Whispers contain specific references to dream content not discussed outside family. Scientific understanding insufficient to explain current observations. Either experiencing mass hallucination, including secondary hallucination of audio recordings, or confronting phenomenon outside current scientific understanding." Dr. Winters enters the story. Concerned about his family's deteriorating mental state, Robert reached out to his colleague, Dr. Harriet Winters, a specialist in parapsychology at the university. Dr. Winters suggested that the Bennetts might be experiencing what she called a consciousness convergence, a rare phenomenon where multiple individuals psychically connect during sleep, sharing a collective dreamscape. But why this particular dream? Robert asked during one of their meetings in early November. Why the forest, the tree, the nooses? Robert and Dr. Winters sat in her office at the university, a space that reflected her position between 2 worlds, the academic and the supernatural. Bookshelves lined the walls containing both scholarly journals and ancient books on dream interpretation, telepathy, and paranormal phenomena. A vintage photography setup occupied one corner, while diplomas and academic awards hung beside framed photographs of crop circles and alleged ghostly manifestations. Dr. Winters herself embodied this duality. A woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, dressed in a conservative tweed suit, yet wearing a pendant of clear quartz crystal and a ring set with a piece of meteorite. She was respected in academic circles for her rigorous methods, yet viewed with suspicion by many for her willingness to explore phenomena others dismissed. Dr. Winters hesitated before responding. Dreams often speak in symbols, Robert. The forest represents the unknown. The tree signifies life and connection. And the nooses. She paused, choosing her words carefully. They could symbolize choices, endings, or transitions. 5 nooses, Robert muttered. 1 for each of us. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that revealed both his exhaustion and his growing desperation. The dark circles under his eyes had deepened, and his normally neat appearance had become disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his tie askew, his beard untrimmed. "I'm a scientist, Harriet. I believe in facts, in logical explanations. But what's happening to my family?" He trailed off, staring at the rain pattering against the office window. "Sometimes our scientific understanding isn't enough to explain certain phenomena," Dr. Winters said gently. "That doesn't mean we abandon scientific method. It means we expand our understanding of what's possible. You're suggesting something supernatural." It wasn't a question, but a reluctant acknowledgement. "I'm suggesting something currently beyond our scientific understanding," she corrected. "Radio waves were once considered supernatural, as was electricity. What we're dealing with may simply be an aspect of consciousness we haven't yet mapped." Robert nodded, though without conviction. "So what do we do? How do we stop these dreams?" The house's dark history. Dr. Winters suggested that the house itself might be a factor. Old buildings sometimes retained energies or impressions from past events, what some might call hauntings, though she preferred the term environmental memory imprints. She recommended researching the history of the property more thoroughly. Robert spent days in the Milfield Historical Society archives, piecing together the story of 47 Oakwood Lane. The small building that housed the town's historical records was a converted Victorian-era home itself, its rooms now filled with filing cabinets, display cases of local artifacts, and the musty scent of aging paper. Ms. Abernathy, the elderly archivist who had overseen the collection for over 40 years, seemed surprised by Robert's interest in the Oakwood Lane property. "Not many ask about that house," she had remarked, peering at him over half-moon spectacles. "Though perhaps more should." Her cryptic comment had sent a chill down Robert's spine, but he had pressed on, requesting property records, newspaper articles, Town meeting minutes. Anything that might shed light on the house's past. The house had been built by Edmund Blackwood, a wealthy timber merchant with a reputation for cruelty. The black and white photographs Robert found showed a stern-faced man with a full beard and cold eyes, standing proudly before the newly constructed house. His wife and 3 children arranged beside him like possessions rather than loved ones. Mrs. Blackwood's face was partially obscured by her bonnet, but something in her posture suggested resignation rather than pride. The children, 2 boys and a girl, stood stiffly in their Sunday best, their expression solemn. Blackwood had made his fortune clear-cutting vast sections of Vermont forest, selling the timber to furniture manufacturers and paper mills throughout New England. He had been known for his ruthless business practices, for underpaying his workers, and for ignoring the primitive environmental regulations of the era. Local Native American tribes had protested his destruction of what they considered sacred forest lands, but their concerns had been dismissed by town officials eager for the economic benefits Blackwood's industry brought to Milfield. In 1889, just 2 years after the house was completed, Blackwood's business partner accused him of stealing lumber from protected forest land. Letters to the editor in the Milfield Gazette revealed the town's divided response, some defending Blackwood as a job creator and respected citizen, others condemning him as a thief who had finally been exposed. The scandal ruined Blackwood's reputation. On a cold November night, he led his wife and 3 children into the forest behind their property. None of them returned. A search party found their bodies the next morning, hanging from a large oak tree in a clearing. The newspaper account, printed on the front page of the November 18, 1889 edition of the Milfield Gazette, was clinical in its description. The bodies of Edmund Blackwood, 43, his wife Constance, 38, and their children Edward, 16, William, 14, and Mary, 7, were discovered suspended from the branches of a large oak tree approximately 1 mile into the forest behind the Blackwood estate. Evidence suggests that Mr. Blackwood, driven to desperation by recent allegations of business impropriety and facing financial ruin, compelled his family to accompany him to the site before taking this tragic course of action. Reverend Thomas Miller has advised that despite the circumstances, the family will be granted Christian burial in the town cemetery, though in an area separate from consecrated ground. The official report ruled it a murder-suicide, claiming that Blackwood, driven by shame and financial ruin, had killed his family before taking his own life. But Robert found troubling inconsistencies in the accounts. A statement from the doctor who examined the bodies noted that all 5 victims showed signs of having walked barefoot through the forest, their feet cut and bloodied by thorns and stones. Unusual if Blackwood had forced them there against their will. More disturbing was the doctor's observation that the arrangement of the bodies, hanging in a perfect circle around the tree's trunk, their toes nearly touching, suggested a deliberate ritualistic configuration that would have been difficult for one man to achieve alone, especially if the victims were struggling. The property changed hands numerous times over the decades, but few owners stayed longer than a few years. Stories of strange sounds, unexplainable cold spots, and troubling dreams became associated with the house. The local newspaper archives contained several accounts of unusual occurrences at the property. A maid in 1912 who claimed to have seen 5 figures standing in the upstairs hallway. A family in 1935 who abandoned the house in the middle of the night, leaving all their possessions behind. A child in 1953 who spoke of rope people in the forest who called his name. The Bennetts had been unaware of this history when they purchased the property. The real estate agent, eager to make the sale, had conveniently omitted these details from her enthusiastic descriptions of the historic Victorian with character. The dreams intensify. As November progressed, the shared nightmares intensified. Now the Bennetts not only saw the forest clearing but felt compelled to approach the tree. In their dreams, they would reach for the nooses, their hands acting independently of their will. They would wake just before placing the ropes around their necks, gasping and drenched in cold sweat. Eleanor described the progression in her journal, which was later found among her paintings in the attic studio. The dream is changing. Before we were observers watching from a distance. Now we're participants. Last night I felt the rough rope against my palms, the weight of the noose as I lifted it toward my neck. I could smell the fibers, feel the texture, and the voices no longer whispers but clear instructions. Join us, they say. Complete the circle. What circle? What am I being asked to complete? And why does part of me want to obey? Robert's scientific journals gave way to increasingly desperate entries. Dream control techniques ineffective. Lucid dreaming methods fail. We recognize we're dreaming but cannot alter the narrative or wake ourselves. Pharmaceutical intervention. Sedatives, REM suppressants, provides temporary relief but intensifies dreams when medication wears off. Family now reluctant to sleep. Timothy napped during school today and woke screaming about the tree people calling him. School nurse sent him home. Principal suggested family counseling. If only it were that simple. Michael, the budding writer, documented his experiences in increasingly disturbing poetry. 5 ropes sway in moonlit dark. 5 souls bound by unseen mark. The twisted oak with reaching limb calls us to its shadow grim. Not our will but ancient debt pulls us to a fate well set. In dreams we walk the needle's path to appease some ancient wrath. The circle breaks, the circle mends. Where one life stops, another ends. 5 for 5, the whispers call, until we hang, one and all. The physical symptoms worsened. All 5 family members began sleepwalking, often found standing in the upstairs hallway, staring out the window toward the forest behind their property. Eleanor would wake to find herself at the back door, her hand on the knob, with no memory of having left her bed. Michael was discovered one morning on the forest's edge, barefoot in the November frost, unable to explain how he had gotten there. Sarah set up a camera with a tripwire at her bedroom door, hoping to document her own nighttime wanderings, only to find the film exposed to light, as if someone or something had deliberately erased whatever had been captured. They reported hearing whispers throughout the house, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening, always unintelligible. Objects would move inexplicably, doors would open and close on their own, and the temperature in certain rooms would drop dramatically without explanation. The family cat, an orange tabby named Rusty that had made the move with them from Boston, refused to enter certain rooms and would hiss at empty corners as if seeing something the humans could not. Timothy began to speak of the tree people, figures he saw in his room at night, their necks bent at odd angles, water dripping from their clothes though it hadn't rained. They want us to join their family, he told his increasingly alarmed parents. They say they've been waiting a long time for us to come home. Sarah developed a rash around her neck, a band of irritated skin that resembled rope burn, though she had worn no scarves or necklaces that might explain it. The family doctor, finding no medical cause, prescribed a cortisone cream that provided no relief. The rash persisted, sometimes fading slightly during the day, only to appear more inflamed each morning. Michael began hearing the whispers even when awake, voices at the edge of perception, calling his name, making promises and threats. He tried drowning them out with his stereo, playing Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd at volumes that prompted complaints from neighbors, but the whispers seemed to weave themselves into the music, becoming more rather than less audible. Eleanor found herself painting compulsively, unable to stop even when exhaustion made her hands shake. The paintings became increasingly detailed, not just the twisted tree and the nooses, but the forest surrounding it, the patterns in the fallen leaves, the symbols carved into the tree's bark. When Robert asked about these symbols, Eleanor had no explanation. "I don't know what they mean," she admitted. "I just know they have to be there. It wouldn't be right without them." Dr. Winter's investigation. Robert, desperate to protect his family, contacted Dr. Winters again. She agreed to conduct an overnight observation at the Bennett home, bringing specialized equipment to measure electromagnetic fields, temperature changes, and audio anomalies. What she recorded that night would later become one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in her research on collective psychic phenomena. Dr. Winters arrived at the Bennett home just before sunset on November 15, 1977. Her station wagon was filled with equipment that represented the cutting edge of paranormal research technology for that time. Heat-detecting cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, high-sensitivity microphones, portable brainwave machines, and a 16mm film camera with night vision capabilities. She was accompanied by her graduate assistant, Thomas Chen, a serious young man whose background in electrical engineering provided valuable technical support for her investigations. The Bennett house presented an imposing silhouette against the darkening sky as they pulled into the driveway. The bare branches of the surrounding trees clawed at the twilight, and the first stars appeared in the eastern sky. Dr. Winters later wrote in her field notes that she felt an immediate sense of unease upon approaching the property, a heaviness in the air, a sensation of being watched from multiple angles at the same time. Eleanor greeted them at the door, her once vibrant appearance now diminished by exhaustion. Her auburn hair hung limply around her pale face, and her hands fidgeted constantly with the hem of her cardigan. Behind her, the interior of the house was dimly lit, shadows gathering in corners despite the numerous lamps that had been turned on throughout the ground floor. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Robert's upstairs with the children. Timothy had another episode at school today. They sent him home early." Dr. Winters nodded sympathetically. "We'll do everything we can to help understand what's happening." As she and Thomas set up their equipment throughout the house, Dr. Winters conducted baseline readings, room temperature, electromagnetic field strengths, background audio. Everything seemed normal, though she noted that the house was unusually quiet, lacking the creaks and settling noises typical of older structures. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. The Bennett family gathered in the living room. Robert in his armchair, Eleanor perched tensely on the edge of the sofa, Michael slouched in the window seat, Sarah curled in on herself in the corner of the couch, and Timothy sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing in a sketch pad. Dr. Winters was struck by how they positioned themselves, maintaining maximum distance from each other within the confines of the room, as if unconsciously establishing a perimeter. Dr. Winters explained the monitoring procedure. Each family member would wear a portable brainwave headset to record their brain activity during sleep. Motion sensors would be placed near their beds to document any movement. Audio recorders and infrared cameras would capture any strange phenomena. The family would take their normal sleeping medication, a mild sedative prescribed by Robert, and go to their respective bedrooms at their usual time. "And if something happens?" Eleanor asked, her eyes darting toward the darkened windows. "Thomas and I will be monitoring everything from the guest room," Dr. Winters assured her. "We'll intervene if necessary." Robert nodded, though his expression suggested doubt about what intervention might be possible against forces he was beginning to believe existed beyond the physical realm. The night of observation. All 5 Bennetts fell asleep at precisely 11:17 p.m. Despite being in separate rooms, their brainwave patterns, monitored by portable machines, synchronized perfectly. At 3:33 a.m., the electromagnetic readings throughout the house spiked dramatically. The temperature dropped more than 15 degrees in a matter of seconds, and the audio recorders captured a chorus of whispers that, when later analyzed, seemed to repeat the same phrase, "Join us in the clearing." Most disturbing was the behavior of the sleepers. At exactly 3:33 a.m., all 5 Bennetts sat upright in their beds at the same time. Their eyes remained closed, but their lips moved in perfect unison, whispering words that matched those captured on the recorders. They remained in this state for exactly 7 minutes before lying down again, returning to normal sleep patterns. Dr. Winters and Thomas, monitoring the feeds from the guest room, watched in amazement as the identical behavior showed up across 5 separate video screens. The temperature in the monitoring room plummeted, their breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. The equipment began to malfunction, static filling audio feeds, video images distorting, brainwave readings becoming erratic. And then, most disturbing of all, a shadow moved across the wall behind them, a human-like shape that seemed to stretch upward, its neck extending at an impossible angle. Thomas saw it first, a strangled gasp escaping his throat as he pointed. Dr. Winters turned just in time to see the shadow figure fade into the darkness of the room's corner, but not before she glimpsed what appeared to be a noose around its stretched neck. The 16mm camera, which had been set to record the monitoring station itself, captured only a dark blur, evidence that something had been there, but not clear enough to definitively identify what. The audio recorder, however, picked up a distinct sound immediately after the shadow's appearance. A creaking like the sound of ropes stretched tight under weight, followed by a whispered, "Soon." The attempted escape. Dr. Winters, shaken by what she had witnessed, recommended that the Bennetts leave the house immediately. "Whatever is happening here goes beyond conventional science," she told Robert the next morning. "I believe your family is in danger." The morning after the observation, Dr. Winters and the Bennett family gathered around the kitchen table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, the cheerful brightness a stark contrast to the previous night's events. Thomas had gone to the university to begin processing the data they had collected, leaving Dr. Winters to present her preliminary findings alone. She spread photographs, brainwave printouts, and heat-detecting images across the table, evidence of the unprecedented phenomena she had witnessed. The images from the infrared cameras showed cold spots in the shapes of human figures standing in the hallway between the bedrooms. The audio spectrograms displayed voice patterns in empty rooms. The brainwave readings demonstrated the impossible synchronization of 5 separate minds during REM sleep. "In my 30 years of investigating paranormal phenomena, I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Winters said, her voice steady despite her obvious concern. "The activity is escalating, and the pattern suggests it's building towards some kind of climax." "What kind of climax?" Eleanor asked, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had gone cold, untouched. Dr. Winters hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Based on the dream content you've reported and the historical events associated with this property, I'm concerned about a potential reenactment scenario." "You think we're going to hang ourselves?" Michael said bluntly. The teenager's directness cut through the careful academic language, exposing the fear they had all been avoiding putting into words. "I think something wants you to," Dr. Winters corrected. "Something is influencing your consciousness during sleep, creating a shared dreamscape that's pushing you toward a specific outcome." Robert, who had built his career on rational explanations for seemingly supernatural phenomena, found himself facing something he couldn't explain. He agreed that they would stay with friends while looking for a new home. But when he shared this decision with his family, he met with unexpected resistance. "We can't leave," Eleanor said, her voice distant, her gaze fixed on the forest visible through the kitchen window. "It wouldn't let us." "The tree is waiting," Michael added. "It knows our names," Sarah whispered. "The whisper people say we belong to them now," Timothy said, his childish voice chillingly matter-of-fact. The family's responses came in rapid succession, almost overlapping, as if they were reciting lines from a script they had rehearsed but weren't consciously aware of knowing. Their voices had taken on a flat, emotionless quality, and their eyes, all 5 pairs, had turned toward the forest behind the property, visible through the kitchen windows. Dr. Winters felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. The family seemed to be in some kind of shared trance state, responding as a collective rather than as individuals. She had documented cases of shared delusions, a psychiatric condition where false beliefs were transmitted from one person to another, but never anything involving 5 people simultaneously, and never with this degree of perfect synchronization. "Robert," she said sharply, trying to break whatever hold had taken them. "Robert, look at me." Slowly, with visible effort, Robert turned away from the window to face her. His eyes seemed to struggle to focus, as if he were looking at her through a thick fog. "This is what I'm talking about," Dr. Winters said. "Whatever is happening here is affecting your family's ability to think independently, to make their own decisions. That alone is reason enough to leave immediately." Robert nodded, seeming to come back to himself somewhat. "You're right. We need to pack some things, just essentials. We can stay at a hotel tonight." Alarmed by their responses, Robert contacted Dr. Winters again, who suggested a more drastic approach. Temporary sedation to break the cycle of shared dreams, followed by immediate relocation. Robert agreed, and that evening, under Dr. Winters' supervision, the family took sedatives that would suppress REM sleep, theoretically preventing the nightmares. The plan seemed to work. The Bennetts slept dreamlessly through the night, and in the morning, they appeared more like their former selves. The strange resistance to leaving had vanished, replaced by eager agreement that they should move as soon as possible. They packed essential items and prepared to stay with Dr. Winters until they could find a new home. The transformation was remarkable. Eleanor hummed softly as she folded clothes into a suitcase, a bright scarf tied in her hair, reminiscent of her pre-nightmare self. Michael helped his younger siblings sort through their belongings, deciding what was essential to take and what could be retrieved later. Robert moved with purpose, his scientist's mind categorizing and organizing their departure with methodical efficiency. Even Timothy seemed lighter, his childish laughter echoing through the house for the first time in weeks. Dr. Winters, observing this change, felt cautious optimism. Perhaps the sedatives had indeed broken whatever psychic connection had formed between the family and the house. Perhaps removing them from the property would be enough to sever the influence completely. She helped pack the car, keeping a watchful eye on the forest edge visible beyond the backyard, unable to shake the feeling that they were being observed. By mid-afternoon, the station wagon was loaded with suitcases, boxes of important documents, photo albums, and a few treasured possessions. Eleanor had carefully wrapped 2 of her paintings, landscapes from before the nightmares began. Michael had packed his typewriter and a box of manuscripts. Sarah brought her camera, though she left her darkroom equipment behind. Timothy clutched his favorite stuffed bear, a well-worn teddy he had owned since infancy. The storm. As they loaded their car, a sudden storm arose. The sky darkened with unnatural speed, and thunder rolled across the mountains. Rain poured down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see. Dr. Winters suggested postponing their departure until the storm passed, a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The storm had appeared with startling suddenness. The November sky, which had been clear and cold all day, turned slate gray within minutes. Clouds boiled overhead, not drifting in from the horizon but seeming to form directly above the property. The wind rose to a howl, bending the trees at the forest's edge like people bowing before some invisible force. Lightning split the sky in jagged patterns that reminded Dr. Winters uneasily of the symbols she had seen in Eleanor's paintings and Timothy's drawings. The thunder that followed seemed to contain patterns too regular to be natural, almost like drum beats, or the rhythmic creaking of ropes stretched tight and then released. "We should wait it out," Dr. Winters said, raising her voice to be heard over the storm's fury. "Driving in this would be dangerous." Robert nodded, though his expression suggested reluctance. "Just until it passes. We'll have better visibility then." They retreated into the house, the family gathering in the living room while Dr. Winters made phone calls from the kitchen, arranging for a hotel and informing her department that she would be taking a few days of emergency leave to help the Bennetts relocate. Through the window above the sink, she watched the storm rage, noting how the rain seemed to fall in a perfect circle around the property, heaviest over the house itself, gradually lessening toward the boundaries, as if the storm were precisely targeted. By evening, the rain showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it had intensified, drumming against the roof and windows with a persistence that seemed almost alive. The wind found every crack and crevice in the old house, creating moaning sounds that rose and fell like distant voices calling across a vast distance. The Bennetts grew increasingly anxious as night approached. Timothy began to cry, saying he didn't want to go to sleep, that the tree people would be waiting for him in his dreams. Sarah developed a headache that left her pale and nauseous, retreating to a corner of the sofa with a cold compress over her eyes. Michael paced the living room, his fingers tapping out rhythms against his thighs that matched the patterns of rainfall against the windows. "Perhaps we should try to leave anyway," Robert suggested, watching his family with growing concern. "The storm can't be this bad all the way to town." But when Dr. Winters attempted to start her car, the engine wouldn't turn over. The headlights flickered weakly before dying completely, and the radio produced only static when she tried to tune to the local station for a weather report. "It's the house," Eleanor said when Dr. Winters returned dripping to the living room. "It knows we're trying to leave. It won't let us go until it gets what it wants." The final night. That night, despite taking sedatives again, the Bennetts experienced the most vivid nightmare yet. In their shared dream, they stood at the edge of the forest clearing. The twisted tree at the center seemed larger, its branches reaching toward them like beckoning arms. The 5 nooses swayed violently in a wind that carried not whispers but clear, commanding voices. "Join us," the voices called. "Complete the circle. Fulfill your purpose." And in the dream, for the first time, they saw figures hanging from 4 of the nooses. A man, a woman, a teenage boy, and a girl. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but their clothing was unmistakably from the late 1800s. The 5th noose hung empty, waiting. The figures swayed gently, though not with the rhythm of bodies moved by wind. Their movements were deliberate, almost like beckoning. Water dripped from their clothing, creating patterns in the earth beneath them, symbols similar to those carved into the tree's trunk. And though their faces remained in shadow, their voices came through with perfect clarity. A man's deep voice, a woman's gentle soprano, a teenage boy's changing tenor, and a young girl's high sweet tones, all calling in unison. "Join us. The circle is incomplete. The 5th must come." The dream had a physical quality beyond any they had experienced before. The cold air against skin, the scent of wet earth and decay, the sound of water dripping from saturated clothing, the taste of fear metallic on their tongues, and a new sensation, a pulling not just toward the tree, but upward, as if gravity itself were reversing, drawing them toward the empty noose that swayed with greater violence than the others, as if eager to be filled. Dr. Winters, sleeping in the guest room, was awakened at 3:33 a.m. by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. She found all 5 Bennetts walking in single file down the stairs, their movements synchronized, their eyes open but unseeing. She called their names, tried to block their path, even attempted to physically restrain Robert, but they moved with unnatural strength and purpose, pushing past her as if she were no more substantial than smoke. "Robert," she cried, grabbing his arm as he passed her on the stairs. "Robert, wake up. You're sleepwalking." But Robert's eyes, though open, saw nothing in the physical world. They were focused on some vision visible only to him. His skin was cold to the touch, his movements mechanical yet fluid, like a puppet guided by invisible strings. When she tried to block his path, he simply pushed her aside with strength that seemed beyond his normal capabilities. The family moved in perfect unison, right feet forward together, left feet forward together, their arms swinging in identical arcs, their heads held at precisely the same angle. They did not speak, did not acknowledge Dr. Winters' increasingly desperate attempts to wake them. They moved with singular purpose toward the back door of the house. She followed them as they walked out the back door into the stormy night toward the forest that bordered the property. The rain had stopped, though the clouds still obscured the moon and stars. The only illumination came from occasional flashes of distant lightning, casting the scene in brief strobe-like bursts of clarity. The ground was saturated from the hours of heavy rainfall, mud pulling at their feet as they walked in an unwavering straight line toward the tree line. Timothy, the youngest, stumbled once in the slick conditions but did not fall. It was as if some unseen force kept him upright, ensuring his continued progress toward the forest. Dr. Winters continued calling after them, pleading for them to wake up, to stop, to come back to the house. But the Bennetts moved steadily forward, their pace neither hurried nor hesitant, like actors hitting their marks in a well-rehearsed play. At the edge of the forest, Dr. Winters stopped. A primal fear prevented her from following them further, an instinctive recognition that some boundaries should not be crossed. She ran back to the house to call for help, but the phone lines were dead. Her car wouldn't start. She was effectively trapped. The search. It wasn't until dawn that the storm finally subsided, allowing Dr. Winters to walk into town for help. The 5-mile journey took her nearly 2 hours on foot, slowed by the mud-slick roads and her own exhaustion. By the time she reached the Milfield police station, the sun had fully risen, revealing a sky washed clean of clouds as if the violent storm had never happened. Sheriff James Holden was skeptical of her story. A silent man in his 50s with a weathered face and suspicious eyes. He listened to her account with thinly veiled disbelief. "So you're saying the whole family just walked into the forest in the middle of the night?" he asked, making notes in a small spiral notebook. And you didn't follow them because you were scared? I was afraid, Dr. Winters corrected, too exhausted to be offended by his tone. But it was more than that. There was something wrong about the forest, something that didn't want me to follow. Sheriff Holden exchanged glances with his deputy, a silent communication that clearly expressed his assessment of Dr. Winters' mental state. But he was professional enough to take her concerns seriously, regardless of how unlikely they seemed. We'll send a search party, he said, closing his notebook. The Blackwood Forest covers nearly 30 square miles. If they're in there, we'll find them. She led the police chief and several officers back to the Bennett property and into the forest, following what she believed to be the path the family had taken. The morning light filtered through the bare November branches, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor that seemed to shift and move even when the air was still. The officers spread out in a search pattern, calling the Bennetts' names, their voices echoing strangely among the trees. Dr. Winters walked with Sheriff Holden, trying to retrace the family's steps from the previous night. The forest looked different in daylight, less threatening perhaps, but somehow more secretive, as if deliberately hiding its true nature beneath a veneer of ordinary woodland. The family was having problems before last night, Sheriff Holden said as they walked. We had reports from the school about the kids. The little one, Timothy, had been talking about people hanging from trees. The teachers were concerned it might be a sign of abuse. It wasn't abuse, Dr. Winters said firmly. It was the house. Something in that house was affecting them, influencing their dreams, their thoughts. Sheriff Holden gave her a sidelong look. You believe in that kind of thing? Haunted houses. I believe in phenomena we don't yet understand, she replied. The human mind is more susceptible to environmental influences than most people realize. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds their footsteps on the leaf-strewn ground and the occasional call of a search party member echoing through the trees. After nearly an hour of searching, one of the deputies radioed Sheriff Holden. Sheriff, you might want to see this. About a mile northeast of your position. There's some kind of clearing that's not on any of our maps. The clearing. After nearly an hour of searching, they found a clearing that hadn't appeared on any maps of the area. In the center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, its branches stretching upward like reaching arms. But there were no bodies, no nooses, nothing to indicate what had happened to the Bennett family. The clearing was perfectly circular, perhaps 50 feet in diameter, with the twisted oak at its exact center. The tree itself was like no oak Dr. Winters had ever seen. Its trunk spiraled unnaturally, as if it had grown by twisting upward from the earth. The bark was covered in symbols that matched those from Eleanor's paintings and Timothy's drawings, angular shapes that resembled no alphabet Dr. Winters recognized, but nonetheless gave the impression of language, of meaning. Most disturbing was the ground beneath the tree. Despite the previous night's heavy rainfall, which had left the rest of the forest muddy and waterlogged, the earth in the clearing was dry, almost dusty. And in that dry earth were footprints, 2 adult sets and 3 smaller sets, all leading to the base of the tree and none leading away. They were here, Dr. Winters said, kneeling to examine the footprints. These matched the family's shoe sizes. But where did they go? Sheriff Holden circled the tree, his expression troubled. No signs of climbing, no disturbed earth to suggest digging. He looked up at the branches. No evidence of hanging either. They wouldn't have had rope, Dr. Winters said. They left the house with nothing but the clothes they were wearing. Then where are they? The sheriff demanded, his skepticism giving way to genuine concern. 5 people don't just vanish into thin air. But they had. Despite an exhaustive search of the surrounding forest, no trace of the Bennett family was found beyond those footprints at the base of the twisted oak. The search continued for weeks. Local volunteers, state police, and even FBI agents combed the forest and surrounding areas. Missing persons bulletins were distributed nationwide, but the Bennett family had vanished without a trace. 5 people who had seemingly walked into the forest and never emerged. Dr. Winters' obsession. Dr. Winters, haunted by her failure to prevent whatever fate had befallen the Bennetts, dedicated the remainder of her career to studying their case. She compiled all the evidence, Robert's journals documenting their shared dreams, Eleanor's increasingly disturbing paintings, Michael's dark writings, Sarah's photographs with their unexplainable shadows, and Timothy's repetitive drawings of the twisted tree. She collected the audio recordings from their bedrooms, the data from the night of her observation, and historical records about the property and the Blackwood family. The Bennett case became Dr. Winter's obsession. She took a leave of absence from teaching to focus exclusively on understanding what had happened to the family. Her colleagues in the psychology department grew concerned as she spent increasingly long hours in her office, surrounded by photographs, documents, and recordings related to the case. The walls of her campus office became a visual representation of her investigation. Maps of the forest with the mysterious clearing marked in red, timelines of the Bennett's experiences, family photographs connected by red string to images of the Blackwood family from the 1880s. She conducted interviews with everyone who had known the Bennetts during their brief time in Milfield. Teachers who had observed the children's deteriorating behavior, Robert's university colleagues, neighbors who had noticed strange occurrences at the house. She spoke with the real estate agent who had sold them the property, with elderly residents who remembered stories of previous occupants experiencing similar phenomena, with local Native American tribal elders who had legends about the forest where the Blackwood family had harvested timber. One such elder, a man named Joseph White Eagle in his 90s, told her, "That part of the forest was sacred to my people. We called it the place between, a threshold where the veil between worlds grows thin. The white man Blackwood cut trees from that place despite our warnings. Some doors, once opened, cannot be easily closed." Dr. Winter's research led her to other cases throughout history, instances where multiple people experienced shared visions or dreams, often preceding their unexplained disappearances. She discovered accounts from various cultures of thin places, locations where the boundary between worlds was permeable, allowing passage under certain conditions. In County Donegal, Ireland, an entire family of 6 had vanished in 1902 after reporting dreams of an ancient stone circle calling them. In a remote village in Japan, 3 generations of one family disappeared in 1943 after describing visions of ancestral spirits beckoning from the forest. In the Appalachian Mountains, a preacher and his 4 followers vanished in 1965 after claiming to have been visited in dreams by messengers telling them their true home lay elsewhere. The patterns were striking. Families or groups experiencing shared visions or dreams, often involving deceased ancestors or historical figures connected to the location. These visions would intensify over time, eventually culminating in the group's disappearance, typically in locations considered liminal spaces: forests, caves, shorelines, mountaintops. Blackwood's journal. In 1983, 6 years after the Bennett's disappearance, a development company purchased the property at 47 Oakwood Lane. The old Victorian house was demolished to make way for a modern subdivision. During excavation, workers discovered something unusual beneath the foundation: a sealed metal box containing a journal dated 1889, belonging to Edmund Blackwood. The journal had been concealed within a small cavity in the foundation stones, carefully wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved it remarkably well despite nearly a century underground. The construction foreman, unsure what to make of the discovery, contacted the Milfield Historical Society, who in turn notified Dr. Winters. The journal was written in careful handwriting that showed both education and urgency. The early entries described Blackwood's business ventures, his ambitions for the timber company, his pride in the grand house he had built for his family. But as the entries progressed, the tone changed. Blackwood began writing about dreams of a forest clearing he couldn't find on any of his survey maps, dreams of a twisted oak that spoke to him in the voices of ancient beings. The journal painted a different picture than the historical record. According to Blackwood's writings, he had discovered something ancient in the forest behind his property, a clearing with a twisted oak that hadn't appeared on any survey maps. The tree, he wrote, spoke to him in dreams, showing him visions of past and future. It demanded sacrifice 5 souls to replace those who had been freed from its grasp. May 12, 1889, found the clearing today. It was not there yesterday. Of this I am certain. We have surveyed every acre of this forest, and I know it as well as I know my own house. Yet there it was, a perfect circle with the twisted oak at its center. The oak is unlike any I have seen, its trunk spiraling as if it grew by turning upon itself. Williams suggested cutting it down, but I forbade it. Something about the tree repels the axe. Jenkins tried nonetheless and claimed the blade bounced off the bark as if striking stone. I believe him, though I did not witness the attempt myself. I find I do not wish to see the tree harmed. June 3, 1889, the dreams began last night. I stood in the clearing beneath the twisted oak, and it spoke to me not with words, but with images, visions flooding my mind. I saw people from times long past and times yet to come, all drawn to the tree, all serving some purpose I cannot yet comprehend. When I woke, I found mud on my feet, though I have no memory of leaving my bed. Constance noticed but said nothing. There is worry in her eyes. July 17, 1889, Constance had the dream last night. She described the clearing, the tree, the sense of being called. The children, too. Edward mentioned it at breakfast, and William admitted he had experienced the same. Even little Mary spoke of the talking tree that visits her in sleep. We are all dreaming the same dream. What does it mean? What does it want from us? The entries grew increasingly disturbed as summer turned to fall. Blackwood described how the dreams intensified, how the tree revealed itself to be a gateway of sorts, a passage between worlds or perhaps between states of being. It showed him visions of previous caretakers. 5 souls bound to the tree, maintaining its existence in the world by their sacrifice, until they could be replaced by another 5, allowing their release. October 8, 1889, the tree has shown me its purpose. It needs caretakers, 5 souls, to anchor it to this realm. The current caretakers have served for centuries and yearn for release. They can only be freed when another 5 take their places. It wants us, me, Constance, the children. We are the perfect 5. We are somehow connected to this place, though I know not how. Perhaps in some past life, perhaps in some future one. Time means nothing to the tree. It exists in all moments simultaneously. Blackwood described fighting against the tree's influence, trying to protect his family from its call. He wrote of attempting to leave Milfield, only to be prevented by sudden illnesses, accidents, and storms that appeared from nowhere. He consulted with local Native American elders, with spiritualists, with priests, anyone who might help him understand and resist the entity in the forest. But in the end, he failed. His final entry, dated November 17, 1889, read, "It has won. We go tonight to the clearing. God forgive me, for I can no longer resist its commands. Perhaps those who come after will be stronger." The official record stated that Blackwood had murdered his family before taking his own life. But his journal suggested something far more complex, a cycle of influence and sacrifice centered around the twisted tree in the forest clearing. Most disturbing was his description of the dreams that had plagued his family in the weeks before their disappearance. Dreams of a forest clearing, a twisted tree, and 5 empty nooses. The theory. Dr. Winters obtained the journal and added it to her growing collection of evidence. The parallels between the Blackwood and Bennett cases were undeniable. 2 families of 5, separated by nearly a century, both living in the same house, both experiencing the same dreams, both disappearing into the forest. But there was one crucial difference. According to local legend, the bodies of the Blackwood family had been found hanging from the tree. No trace of the Bennetts had ever been discovered. This difference troubled Dr. Winters deeply. If the historical accounts were accurate, why had the Blackwoods' bodies remained while the Bennetts vanished completely? And if Blackwood's journal was truthful, had the Blackwoods actually died? Or had they somehow been absorbed by the tree, becoming the very entities that later called to the Bennett family? In her final paper on the Bennett case, published just before her retirement in 1998, Dr. Winters proposed a controversial theory. What if the Blackwood family hadn't actually died in 1889? What if, instead of hanging from the tree, they had been absorbed by it, becoming part of its consciousness? And what if the tree, through dreams and whispers, had called the Bennett family to replace them, to take their places in the nooses, allowing the Blackwoods to finally rest? Consider the possibility, she wrote, that what we perceive as death may, in certain circumstances, be transformation. The tree in the clearing appears to be a nexus point, a place where conventional physical laws break down, where consciousness can transfer between different states of being. The Blackwood family, in joining with the tree, became its caretakers or anchors, maintaining its existence in our reality. After nearly a century of service, they sought release. The tree, needing new anchors, called to the Bennett family, another group of 5 with the specific psychic resonance it required. It would explain why no trace of the Bennetts had ever been found. It would explain why the hikers had seen only 4 occupied nooses, not 5. And it would suggest a cycle, a hunger that would eventually awaken again, calling another family of 5 to the clearing beneath the twisted oak. Later incidents. In 1992, 15 years after the Bennett's disappearance, a group of hikers reported a strange experience while camping in the forest near the former Bennett property. They described waking simultaneously in the middle of the night, drawn to a clearing they hadn't noticed during the day. In the center stood a massive oak tree, and hanging from its branches were 5 nooses, 4 occupied by indistinct figures, and 1 empty, swaying in a windless night. The hikers, 3 college students on a weekend camping trip, had no knowledge of the Bennett case or the Blackwood family history. They had chosen the location for its convenience, just far enough from town to feel adventurous, but close enough to civilization to be safe. They had set up camp as the sun was setting, cooked dinner over a small fire, and settled into their sleeping bags shortly after midnight. Jason Miller, the group's unofficial leader, later described what happened. "We all woke up at exactly the same time, 3:33 a.m. I remember checking my watch. There was this pulling sensation, like something was tugging at us, not physically but mentally, drawing us toward something in the forest. We didn't discuss it, didn't even speak. We just got up and started walking, like we were in a trance." The 3 hikers moved through the darkened forest with unusual confidence, despite having no flashlights and despite the forest being unfamiliar territory. They described the sensation as being pulled along a predetermined path, as if their bodies knew exactly where to go, even though their conscious minds did not. "Then we found ourselves in this clearing," continued Lisa Chen, another member of the group. "It wasn't there when we set up camp. I'm certain of it. We would have noticed a clearing with this massive twisted tree in the center. The tree was wrong somehow, the way it grew, the way it twisted upward. And hanging from its branches were these nooses." The 3rd hiker, Mark Thompson, described the figures. "There were people hanging from 4 of the nooses. Not normal people. They were like shadows, 3-dimensional shadows. I could tell there was a man, a woman, and 2 others who seemed younger. Their clothes were old-fashioned, like from 100 years ago. The 5th noose was empty, just swinging back and forth, even though there wasn't any wind. The hikers fled, reporting their experience to local authorities. A search team found no clearing, no tree, and no evidence of the figures the hikers had described. The incident was dismissed as a shared hallucination, possibly caused by carbon monoxide from their campfire or toxic mushrooms mistakenly added to their evening meal. But Dr. Winters saw it differently. The hiker's account aligned too perfectly with the shared dreams of the Bennett family. She theorized that what they had witnessed was a momentary thinning of the veil between worlds, a glimpse of whatever reality had claimed the Bennetts. She interviewed the hikers extensively, recording their accounts and comparing them with the dream descriptions from Robert's journals. The similarities were striking. The twisted oak, the circle of nooses, the shadowy figures in old-fashioned clothing. But there was a new detail. The hikers reported seeing only 4 occupied nooses, not 5. Hayes saw the Blackwood family, Dr. Winters wrote in her research notes. The 4 figures hanging from the tree were Edmund, Constance, and 2 of their children. But where was the 5th Blackwood? Young Mary, who was only 7 when they disappeared. And why were there no signs of the Bennett family? The empty noose suggests a space waiting to be filled. But waiting for whom? Her questions would remain unanswered for years as she continued to gather evidence and develop her theories about what she now called the Blackwood-Bennett phenomenon. More strange occurrences. Dr. Winters' theory was met with skepticism from the scientific community. Without concrete evidence, without bodies, without the clearing and tree that seemed to appear and disappear, Her ideas remained speculation. But those familiar with the case, those who had read Robert's journals and seen Eleanor's paintings, those who had heard the whispers captured on the audio recordings, found her theory disturbingly plausible. The subdivision built on the former Bennett property never thrived. Houses remained unsold or were quickly abandoned by owners who complained of troubling dreams and unexplainable unease. Eventually, the development was abandoned altogether, the half-built houses reclaimed by nature as the forest slowly expanded back over the land that had once been cleared. County officials, citing environmental concerns, designated the area a protected woodland, preventing any further development. Signs were posted warning hikers to stay on marked trails, though these warnings mentioned nothing about twisted trees or forest clearings that appeared and disappeared. Yet local residents knew to avoid that particular section of forest, especially at night, especially in November. In 2002, 25 years after the Bennett's disappearance, a local newspaper ran a retrospective on the case. The journalist, intrigued by Dr. Winter's theories, ventured into the forest to search for the clearing and the twisted oak. He never returned. His camera was found 3 days later at the edge of the forest, containing a single photograph, a blurry image of what appeared to be a large tree in a clearing with dark shapes hanging from its branches. The discovery of Blackwood's journal had reignited interest in the Bennett case. Local newspapers ran retrospective articles. A true crime writer contacted Dr. Winters about collaborating on a book. The university's parapsychology department received a grant to study collective consciousness phenomena with the Bennett case as its central focus. Yet, as public interest in the case grew, strange occurrences began to plague those investigating it. The true crime writer reported dreams of a forest clearing and a twisted tree, eventually abandoning the project after waking one morning with unexplainable rope burns around his neck. A graduate student transcribing Blackwood's journal developed a mysterious rash around her throat and began sleepwalking, always found heading toward the forest behind the former Bennett property. The photographer documenting Eleanor's paintings for a university archive complained of shadows appearing in his images, shadows that resembled hanging figures. Dr. Winters herself was not immune. Though she had never experienced the shared dreams while the Bennetts were still present, she began to have nightmares about the clearing and the tree after reading Blackwood's journal. In her dreams, she saw 9 figures, 4 hanging from the tree's branches, recognizable as the Blackwood family despite their shadowed faces, and 5 more approaching from the forest's edge, clearly the Bennetts. But there was a 10th figure as well, watching from a distance, and Dr. Winters understood with dream logic certainty that this observer was herself. "The tree knows I witnessed its taking of the Bennetts," she wrote in her private notes. "It recognizes me as a potential threat, or perhaps as a potential messenger. It wants me to tell their story, but not to prevent its continuation. The question that haunts me is, why 5? What significance does this number hold for the entity in the clearing? And if the cycle continues, who will be the next family of 5 called to the twisted oak?" Dr. Winters' final years. Dr. Winters presented her findings at parapsychological conferences, published papers in specialized journals, and eventually compiled her research into a book titled Collective Consciousness and Liminal Spaces, The Bennett Case and Beyond. The academic community largely dismissed her work as pseudoscience, but among those who studied paranormal phenomena, her research was regarded as groundbreaking. Meanwhile, the house at 47 Oakwood Lane stood empty once again. The Bennett's relatives, after months of legal proceedings, were granted the right to clear out the family's belongings. Eleanor's paintings were donated to the university's art department, though several went missing during the transfer. Robert's academic papers and research notes were archived in the university library's special collections. The children's possessions were packed into boxes and stored in the attic of a distant cousin's home in Massachusetts, where they would remain untouched for years. As for Dr. Harriet Winters, she passed away in 2008, still haunted by her inability to save the Bennett family. In her personal papers, discovered after her death, was a sealed envelope labeled, "For when they return." Inside was a detailed account of everything she had witnessed and learned about the case, along with a warning, "The tree hungers. It will call again. Listen not to the whispers from the forest." The envelope also contained a sketch drawn by Dr. Winters herself of a clearing, a twisted oak, and 5 nooses. 4 were occupied by shadowy figures. The 5th remained empty, waiting. The continuing mystery. Some mysteries resist resolution. Some stories have no ending, only a pause before the next cycle begins. The Bennett family walked into the forest on a November night in 1977, led by dreams they all shared. Whether they found peace or horror, freedom or eternal imprisonment, remains unknown. But somewhere in the forests of northern Vermont, if local stories are to be believed, there stands a clearing that doesn't appear on any map. And in that clearing grows a twisted oak with branches that reach like grasping arms toward the sky. And from those branches hang 5 nooses, sometimes empty, sometimes not, depending on who's dreaming and when. The Bennett case may never be solved, at least not in any way that satisfies our human need for concrete answers and logical explanations. But it serves as a reminder of how little we truly understand about consciousness, about dreams, about the thin boundaries between what we call reality and what lies beyond. In the years since their disappearance, the Bennett family has achieved a kind of immortality not in flesh and blood, but in the retelling of their story. They live on in case studies, in whispered local legends, in the cautionary tales told to children who wander too close to the forest edge. And perhaps, in some way, they live on in that clearing beneath the twisted oak, their consciousness preserved in a realm beyond our comprehension, waiting for someone else to hear the whispers, to dream the dream, to complete the circle once again. The most disturbing aspect of the Bennett case isn't what we know, it's what we don't know. It's the possibility that their fate wasn't an ending, but a transformation. It's the idea that, somewhere, in some form, the Bennett family still exists, caught between worlds, between waking and dreaming, between life and whatever lies beyond. Robert Bennett once wrote in his journal, just days before their disappearance, "What if dreams aren't escapes from reality, but glimpses of other realities? What if, in sleeping, we touch worlds parallel to our own? And what if sometimes those worlds reach back?" His questions remain unanswered. But for those who study the outer limits of human experience, the Bennett case stands as a testament to possibilities beyond our understanding. A family of 5 who shared the same nightmares and ultimately the same unfathomable fate. In the end, perhaps the most merciful thing we can hope is that the Bennetts found peace, whether in this world or another, that the dreams that plagued them became something else, not nightmares of nooses and twisted trees, but visions of whatever paradise awaits those who pass beyond the veil of ordinary existence. Or perhaps they are still dreaming, still hanging in that liminal space between worlds, waiting for someone to take their places so they can finally wake up. The warning: listen carefully. On autumn nights when the wind moves through the trees, some say you can hear them, 5 voices calling from the forest, sharing one dream, one message, one warning. Don't follow the whispers. Don't enter the clearing. Don't look up at the twisted oak, or you too might find yourself caught in the dream that never ends. The Bennett case remains open, a mystery without resolution, a story without conclusion. 5 people who walked into the forest and never returned, leaving behind only questions, theories, and the lingering fear that some dreams are more than dreams. They're invitations to a fate beyond imagining. And somewhere in Vermont, in a forest clearing that appears on no map, beneath a twisted oak that exists in the space between realities, 5 nooses sway in a windless night, waiting for the next dreamer to answer their call. Sweet dreams, dear listeners, and remember, be careful what you dream. For some nightmares are shared, and some fates are written in the spaces between sleeping and waking, in the shadows between trees, in the whispers that call your name when the world is dark and the boundary between what is and what might be grows thin enough to cross. This has been Tales from the Dark Side. Until next time, may your sleep be dreamless, and may the forests of your mind contain no clearings, no twisted oaks, and no empty nooses swaying in the dark.